the Overman Warrior Podcast.
Hi, Rich Hoffman here. So as we peel back the layers of how people come to believe things, and when I say I think the education system of our current civilization is completely wrong, I would base that on mistakes made at the beginning. And that's not to say that mistakes are purposeful misalignments, but if you start a path on the wrong assumption, you're going to get bad results the further you stay committed to that bad assumption. And a couple things that really cause trouble for the way that we build our social awareness of history and knowledge and acquisition of information is we made assumptions based on Darwin's theories of evolution, which proposed that all life was built on mistakes, deformities, survival of the fittest, and that through either mistakes or survival of the fittest survival rates, you had genetic mutations that we evolved into who we are. And it's an interesting theory, and to say that all life came from some single-celled organisms out of the water a long time ago is a thought process. But to commit to that thought process, the problem that you get with institutions is that once they commit to something, they don't like to step away from it. Now, I have a background in aerospace. I get to talk to a lot of very smart people all the time. And I have a long history of dealing with very intelligent engineers. But once they put something on a print or a drawing, or once it's chronicled in a certain way, then they try to force a 20 or 30 year evolution of that part number to hold to the original characteristics that were thought up by some engineer a long time ago. And for them, it's almost like a copyright of a book and what they put on a print. So they adhere to that, even if better methods are discovered later on. They're always slow and very reluctant to accept that. And so often you find in those kinds of manufacturing environments that you are having to overcome an engineer's desire to keep things the way they were so they can hold some sort of immortality of their own investment into that work for the future to outlive them. It's a very serious thing, and that's just in engineering. You can imagine what scientists who spend years and years getting a PhD in something, how they feel. And archaeologists and anthropologists and all scientists, geologists, you can't blame them for investing a huge portion of their lives in what has essentially evolved into a liberal institution with lots of liberal politics, and you get grant money based on how well you pander to those types of people who invest in those kinds of things. You could easily lose your way. And so with Darwin, there was a persistence to accept certain elements. There could be elements that are correct about it, but to say that Darwin came up with a thought and we're going to stick with it no matter what, and we're going to build a timeline that's about 300,000 years of human evolution around it, when other evidence shows other things. And one thing I do like about the scientists, and especially when it comes to like biblical archaeology, love biblical archaeology because in Western civilization, you have a biblical understanding, and it's interesting to see how much of those biblical stories are found in actual archaeology. And it really is confirming of a vast, larger history outside your normal experience. And it's always a fun adventure to not just contemplate it religiously, but scientifically. Always new information coming in. But again, I have a background in aerospace, and you should always be open to new ideas on new manufacturing methods, and always someone who comes along with a better rate of invention or a new patent, a new way of doing something really good, and accommodating that as always being thoughtful and innovative. So, but that comes back to the other big detriment from the outset of institutionalized science, and that was socialism, as Karl Marx injected and Engels injected their work in the middle of the 1800s, migrating through the union movement into the early parts of the 20th century. And then from there, this global push for communism, the red decade of the 1930s, there was a gradual, and I would say a climax in the 60s with an outright communist attempt to overthrow it, the hippie movement, how all those elements corrupted institutions, science, education, the way we acquire information. If you really peel back the layers of everything, it goes back to those mistakes. Darwin adhering to things that you're trying to fit everything into a timeline that fits the Darwin view of evolution, and then Marxism, the reduction of individual input to collectivist causes. We're all better together kind of mentality. So when you talk about biblical archaeology, I find it very fascinating. When you dig in the Near East and you find all kinds of great stuff, there's all kinds of wonderful books that show how scripture aligns with actual sites that have been found. And you can't blame that for other religions that have found and correlated their efforts to their religious text to what they observe in the world around them. And so in the 1990s, I read this really fantastic book, and I've never been in love with institutions as they exist. I might root for a college basketball team or a football team, or it might be some reference that that make sports fun. But as far as institutions, one institution over another institution, I think most of them have built their foundations in folly, and they got it wrong from the outset. And that comes from, again, having experience. I went through the process, and I never liked it. I thought it was always lacking. And all my adult life, I've dealt with lots of smart people. A lot of them hold masters and PhDs, and I have a good understanding of how that side of the world thinks of things. But I also often see that those institutions put those minds in a box that often hold them back, and I don't have a lot of respect for that, because it keeps you from being what I think is a complete, total thinking human, and being innovative and creative in every way you can be as an imaginative creature. So in the 1990s, I read this very fantastic book with that not being in love with institutions mindset. I think this is one of the pinnacle books that really kind of changed a lot of things in the world. Forbidden Archaeology by Michael Cremio and Richard Thompson. And this book was written with kind of a Vedic mindset to kind of accommodate the Hindu view of the world, and in a Vedic mindset, human beings have gone through many golden ages, many tens of millions of years of them, hundreds of millions of years of rise and fall, the essential cycle of the Vico cycle. That's always that's most captured properly in great works of art like Finnegan's Wake by James Joyce. It's a very real thing in the human race, is this constant rise and fall, not just of individuals, but of entire societies. So forbidden archaeology is kind of the biblical archaeology for the Vedic mindset. And in it, people, lots of institutionalized science have said that the finds in this book were cherry picked, but the problem is that there were cherries to pick. In this book, there's problematic archaeological finds that institutionalized scientists will say were misidentified. The data recordings that you naturally apply scientifically were incorrect, or there must be something wrong with them. But the problem is there's metallic spheres that were found in rock that is hundreds of millions of years old, that had grooves in them, that looked to be man-made, and there's carved stone, the old red sandstones that had stone tools in them that were several hundred millions of years old by the same dating method you come up with everything else out there that correspond, that you build dates off of. And there's reports of nails and hammers and human artifacts embedded in coal and stone, rock, that it would have taken millions of years to solidify. So there's a lot of interesting things to consider in this book. And again, this came out a while ago, and it's taken, I guess, several decades, 30 years in this case, to kind of everybody digest it. I've always kind of leaned in the direction of whatever the evidence says, look at it, consider it for what it is, and let the adventure of discovery take you to truth. But you can't take truth and put it into a box and say we have a pre-existing theory, and the accreditation of the people who created the box must be respected, and we have to put all that information in that box. Because the box may have been improperly built to begin with. So what you need to do and I tend to do it with everything in life. That's why I have a lot of interesting things to say about things. Because if you apply the same method to politics or mathematics or science or business, archaeology, the history of human existence, if you do that, you're going to find that you get a lot of answers to questions nobody knew that they were supposed to be asking. And the problem with institutionalized science is they built everything on a foundation of falsehood, and that's going to become an emerging theme, because we're at a place, and I would call it the age of disclosure, where you have a president that's open to being very transparent and returning the nation to the people that it's supposed to represent, and that this deep state idea of a fourth branch of unaccountable government is being dismantled, and then the institutions that build that kind of administrative state has caused a lot of harm, and people are now wanting to reject it. And then it goes back to the original premise of people saying, well, how did this happen? Why did these things occur? Why do we not know some of the things we should know about our own history? And the answer is, well, when you get something like this, and they come up with a lot of, 900 pages or so of evidence of anomalies archaeologically that have been found, again, metal balls and human implements that are embedded in rock and coal that would have taken millions of years to embed themselves in that. It goes way beyond our 2,000 or 3,000 years of what we know in human utilization of those tools. And in the Hindu religion, that's why when people criticize Vivek Ramaswamy for not being a Christian, or his parents didn't come from America, they were immigrants that came to America, even though he was born in America, and that's somehow supposed to be held against him. It's preposterous, just because has a different view on religious ideas. The Hindus, I think, are fascinating in what they think about cycles and the interaction of what I would say are UFO encounters. You call them gods, with a lot of blue skin characters that are coming and going in their life. And they believe in this long cycle of the human race that replenished through a Vico cycle on Earth over and over again. And the archaeological evidence that they recorded in this book finds that. And critics can say, well, they were cherry picking evidence. The problem is that there's something to cherry pick. There's evidence to look at and say, why is this metal ball in this rock, or was found next to this kind of aged fossil that dates 200 million years old or 300 million years old? It doesn't make sense. It shouldn't make sense under conventional, Darwinian, Marxist, institutionalized procedures. The box that they put all this information in and try to force everybody to stay in that box was wrong. It was a folly. Should have never been approached that way, but it was. And we now are in a time where you can write books like this and people can read them, and it takes decades for it to kind of seep into mainstream science. And mainstream scientists have spent a lot of money and time getting a PhD and studying what's in the box, are going to be reluctant to look at evidence outside the box because it's not what their careers point them towards. But free thinkers who are not in the box to begin with and are happily outside the box, which is kind of where I've always been and where I always want to be. I don't like being inside confined boxes of thought, because then if you get some new idea or some new evidence comes your way, then you're not open-minded enough to accommodate it into understanding and knowledge and truth. And this book, just using it as a reference because it's a foundation for a lot of things that I end up talking about, it asks a lot of questions that nobody quite has answers for, because the answers are not in the box of institutionalized science. And if that institution wants to be accommodating to truth, then it has to open itself up to more evidence as it's seen, and not just say we're going to discard it because it doesn't fit in our timeline of understanding, which was established by Darwin or Karl Marx, or the progress of institutions where accreditation was the capital for getting funds for your projects. Even if the truth tells you that something else is going on, you go out and use the funding to get evidence that cherry picks what gets you the funding and ignores the things that might lead to truth. And books like this, I found over time, are definitely looking for the truth. And it might disrupt institutionalized science, but so what? Because we're all after the truth here, no matter what the field of endeavor is. And this is just one field, the forbidden archaeology. It's a lot less forbidden now than it was when this book came out. And I think another 20 or 30 years of that is going to be a complete disclosure of a whole new way of looking at our past that I think we're on the precipice of now, which is very exciting. But there's going to be a lot of people that built their careers around falsehoods. They're going to find that being in the box was the wrong place to be. And they're going to come to regret it. So some interesting things to think about. But if you ever get a chance, this is a great book to read. And I would say if you're trying to understand truth, this is one way to get there, just by starting to think about things outside what you've been taught. Because most of the people who taught you didn't know themselves, and they accepted falsehoods when they should have been seeking the truth themselves, so they could instruct others in what it is with new evidence as it presents itself. It doesn't matter what field you're talking about. That's a truth in every circumstance. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you ever read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.
Thank you for listening.